The agenda this week analysed Ontario's early losses selling pot, spoke to former independent MP Jane Philpott about her political career, looked at the psychology that inclines people to be politically left or right-leaning, and went behind the scenes of the documentary Prey. The agenda's Week in Review begins with a look at the business of making minority parliament work.
I think there is that lacking national project for us to get behind. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we need to go to war or something like that. That would be the antithesis of it. I'd like to see something constructive that as a nation we can pull together.
Well, you'd think climate change would be that mission, wouldn't it?
And there is the perfect example. And, you know, Peter, who I have a lot of respect for, I'd love to see him influence his party to get them on the page so that we can work together around climate change. It's difficult when we're such a big energy-producing nation, but we've got to get there, and I think that could be the one that
do you see that role for yourself right now?
It may surprise people, but I'm sitting here nodding next to Peggy on a lot of these important issues, as I have with other commentators. And Martha touched on it, and Peggy did, about having a national purpose, something that does actually unify some of the fractious nature of our country. Regional parties. We have a separatist party now back in Parliament in numbers with the Bloc. There's a lot of tension fulminating in the West that Martha can speak to in more detail. But the issue of climate change, it's real. I spent a lot of time as a young man working in the Arctic and then went back as a defense minister when we were doing Arctic maneuvers there with the Canadian forces. You can see the change, and people who have tracked it, the scientists most importantly, but more important than that are the people who live there and see what's going on in their environment. And so Canada can and should play a leading role. How do we get there is the question. Andrew Scheer zeroed in on two things, but didn't perhaps give as much detail as was necessary for people to buy into it. Having a technology response as opposed to a tax response, because Peggy and I may disagree on this, but when young people are saying, look, I'm not getting as much in return because I'm paying a lot of money, and that's true for everybody. We are a very high-taxed, very highly regulated environment in this country today, which is hard for businesses, especially startups. And there are some brilliant startups in the area of green technology. But the transition period, even the United Nations talks about a transition period, and it's been coal, fossil fuels, oil and gas, natural gas, and then to renewables. So it's a period of time now where we're working towards getting to fewer emissions, zero emissions, Paris Climate Accord. But I would supplant right here that with oil and gas in Western provinces, that can go to both coasts, that can be exported to the world, that also has a geopolitical implication because we're pushing back on Iran, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, countries we criticize for their human rights, but we buy their product in large amounts, especially in the East, whereas we have the ability to export a highly regulated, valuable commodity to the world, generate massive wealth, jobs, opportunity in Canada, and plow those resources back into the new green economy because we can't pay for it and keep pace otherwise. That's a big project. That's a big national purpose.
Let me put that to Martha Hall-Findlay. I mean, you were on this program a couple of weeks ago talking about the angst that Western Canada is suffering from right now, and we talked about Wexit and how strong that is. Do you think the vision that was just described by Peter MacKay is something that, you know, given who's in this minority parliament, there are Greens who under no circumstances are going to be for pipelines. There's an NDP leader who represents a British Columbia riding who under no circumstances is going to be for that pipeline. Can this parliament get around that vision?
I am so glad to hear Peter say everything he said, and I actually completely agree with him. Even though we come from different political backgrounds, the biggest frustration in the election was that the Conservative Party came across as not having anything really to say on climate change. Yes, there was some talk about technology, but listen, a carbon tax on its own is not a climate plan. Saying no to a carbon tax is also no answer. There are so many things going on, and frankly, Stephen, I think there's a real opportunity for the Prime Minister. And I would say, just to Peggy's comments, national unity is in fact the Prime Minister's first priority. His first priority is the national interest and therefore national unity. And it is very bad in the West.
Political scientist, I got a minute left here. Let me ask you this. Given Andrew Scheer's situation right now, where the Conservatives are in some ways going to be looking a lot inward over the next few months as he works towards his leadership review in April, are the real leaders of the opposition in this country right now the premiers of Alberta and Ontario?
I mean, well, those are two different
and maybe Saskatchewan too.
Two very different people. I think Doug Ford's trying to find a way to be a constructive national leader. I don't get that impression about Premier Kenney, to be frank. No, I mean, if I were here's a piece of advice you rarely give. If I were Mr. Scheer, I'd be looking to Michael Ignatieff in 2008, just after he won the leadership, to see how he negotiated with the Conservative Party to get some things he wanted on the budget. He was effective in that. It won him some plaudits. Didn't work in the next election, but he was effective as the leader of the official opposition in extracting pretty good concessions from the Prime Minister.
How is it possible to lose money doing this?
That's a really good question. So, part of the answer is what Jay alluded to. So in 2018, we had a government change, and the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation had already signed all these leases and put in, kind of had all these overhead costs for stores they thought the provinces were going to run. And that didn't end up happening because the Ford government moved towards a private retail model. So if you actually look at the breakdown of how that $42 million loss came about, revenue was $63 million. They didn't make money, but their general administrative expenses was so high that, to some extent that added up to the loss. So they are saying it's a loss because of startup costs and they had to change the model. But it's yet to remain, and we should look at the data in the next 3 months as to how the performance of these stores have been going. Because really, as Pamela pointed out, I think a lot of people prefer coming into stores and buying the cannabis that way instead of buying it online. And right now, the province gets their money from the OCS.ca. They don't have any physical retail stores, right? So, yeah.
$42 million lost.
Yes, and actually, Steve, the Cannabis New Brunswick, the provincially run, online store in New Brunswick, shut down altogether because the model wasn't making sense and they weren't making money. So, there's a precedent that one of a similar model failed. It will be interesting to see what happens here.
I don't want to be unusually harsh on them. They've decided to go a different route. But Jay, do you think is there a reasonable, logical excuse or explanation for losing that much money?
I think so. I mean, not to be flip, but I think so. I mean, you have basically the numbers that you reflect, that $42 million includes zero of the sales at bricks and mortar retail. It only goes through the end of March 2019. So the idea that you had all the startup costs and basically none of the benefit of actually selling lots of cannabis would equal a $42 million loss. And I think it's also important to note, if you zoom out a bit, no state, no country, including Canada and including sort of the province of Ontario, has done this flawlessly. My mother just sent me an email that said, after year one in Massachusetts, lots of complaints about how legal cannabis is rolled out. This is not new. This is a difficult thing to get right because unlike alcohol, which has a 100-year history, we know by the day how much alcohol is going to be bought, by whom basically, and where. We know none of that entering cannabis. And until or unless we start to build sort of databases about how long and how much and what types of products people want to buy, we're really just sort of flying blind. And what you see is flying blind for a year. Flying blind year 2, you start to be able to see a few things coming down the pike. You start to open more retail stores. You start to learn a lot more. And so I think year 2 will go a lot smoother than year 1. Year 3 will go a lot better than year 2.
Yeah, what's so interesting in Canada is we have different rules by province. And so we've got some great lessons learned from Saskatchewan and Manitoba, for example, where you have strong government regulatory oversight with the private sector able to deliver product and do so in a convenient way for the customer. And I think that model is one where we've had a lesson that we can apply to the rest of the country.
Bruce, how would you sort of compare and... All right, so you wanted to make a point. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we're talking about numbers of stores and models of ownership, but maybe for texture for the audience, my most interesting experiences have been to go to a store, say, in Nova Scotia, where it's a store-in-store. What I mean by that is that you walk in the store, and it used to be a liquor store. It still is. But at the back, they have a carved-out area which has cashiers, and it's also a cannabis store. And so if you want, you can pick up your bottle of wine, walk to the back, get your cannabis, and pay for both at the same place. And when I was last there, but you can't pick your cannabis up and walk to the front and pay for it. Apparently, it might get in your pocket or something. But busy cash registers were at the back, and the not busy ones were the liquor-only ones at the front. Compare that to, say, Newfoundland, where they have a mix of private and public sector, and they have some of these stores now which are kind of the, I'll call it the quick service. It's a gas station which has a cannabis shop and has a small liquor beer area, and then all the other stuff. That starts to me to foreshadow there's a bunch of ways this could work, and we could actually start to have data that shows substitution effect. If you have a great beverage offering that's made with cannabis versus alcohol, and you only have to park your car once and go to that one store, I wonder what the impact will be there. And so I think stores aren't the same despite provinces having different numbers or different ownership models. They actually have different rules of what you can do in the province.
Who do you want in the pipeline that's now not in the pipeline of potential judges?
Part of my challenge is I have no idea who's in the pipeline because I can't tell you if there's diversity applying to the bench. I don't know if we have the right candidates applying because I don't have any line of sight to anything except 2 names at a time.
I don't know if you saw this quote, so I'm going to read it to you now. Peter Russell,
Yes.
University of Toronto political scientist, professor of long-standing and high reputation, says, who helped design the current system, says the process is meant to prevent the politicization of judges. And he says your proposals would do the opposite. His response to your proposal was, that's bad news. They want a bunch of names so they can look down and find a nice soulmate Tory.
And he is so respected. And I've talked to former attorney generals and I've talked to both federal and provincial. There are 2 parts to the appointment of judges. One is to decide whether they're qualified or not qualified. And that's really important. But the second part is for me to pick people who reflect some of the values that I have. And I want to put some of those in the regulation so people understand, understanding victims' issues, making sure that they have community leadership, making sure that those pieces are there. And sometimes only I can assess that. And I don't know why, as Attorney General, I'm allowed to do a ton of things, but I'm not allowed to pick from a bigger pool of people who a third-party committee say are qualified.
Okay, follow-up question. Do you intend to consult the legal profession on the changes you intend to make to your selection process?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm from the legal profession. I spent years on the executive with the OBA. Some other groups were in touch with me, and we're going to sit down with them and have that conversation. One's beyond what I've already talked to.
OBA, Ontario Bar Association.
Sorry, Ontario Bar Association, the Federation of Ontario Law Associations, the Law Society, Toronto Lawyers Association, Cable, all sorts of different groups.
What about the judges themselves? Like, would you consult with the Chief Justice of Ontario on this?
I absolutely have several times, and my staff have done briefings. I don't want to give the content of the discussion, but I had a meeting with the Ontario Chief Justice Mazenov Monday morning, and then Tuesday afternoon I had a meeting with Chief Justice Morowitz, Chief Justice Strathy, and Chief Justice Mazenov at the same time.
Okay, one last thing on this. Okay, we all remember pretty well a year and a half ago when Premier Ford decided that he wanted to cut Toronto City Council in half, and he got a decision from a judge that he didn't like, and he said, I'm going to use the notwithstanding clause of the Constitution to override this unelected judge's decisions because I don't like them. There was a great deal of controversy about the fact that potentially, for the first time ever, an Ontario government would use the notwithstanding clause to override charter rights. And now that you're the Attorney General and the #1 law guy in the province, I'm kind of curious as to what you think about that approach.
Well, I'm actually unanswered on it. I gave a back and forth with John Fraser, with the Liberals, in a discussion. And basically it boils down to this. The Charter is a living tree, right? We all know the living tree doctrine that, the Charter evolves over time. Section 33 is in the Charter, so it doesn't stand alone. And I think you would have to look at every situation uniquely.
If you go on OkCupid, this American dating site, or for all I know, beyond America, the question on OkCupid that correlates the best with social liberalism versus conservatism is, do you prefer spending time with simple or complex people? And so liberals, as you might be able to guess, are more likely to say complex people, and conservatives are more likely to say simple people. And one thing I like about that statistic is it gives you a sense of both sides' perspective on that. So I'm the sort of person that would have answered that in the liberal way, I suppose. I prefer spending time and dating complex people. But I can completely see the conservative side on this, because dating complex people is a real pain in the butt. So it's actually, these are very sympathetic perspectives, understandable, but pretty fundamental differences.
And just to be clear, we're not making a value judgment about which is better. We're just pointing out they're different, right?
That's right. Yeah, in this respect especially.
Okay, gotcha. Becky, let's follow up. How do these differences show up in areas of life that have nothing to do with politics?
So they can show up, like you mentioned before, in terms of music preferences, sometimes with how people dress, activities, movies that you like. So there was a study several years ago that went into college students' dorms, and they could tell by kind of the things that were around their room what their political orientation was, based on the kind of novels that they might be reading and things like music preferences.
Neat. Paul, who sees the world as a more threatening place, conservatives or liberals?
So there's a lot of evidence suggesting that conservatives, maybe this is surprising, are more sensitive to threat. They're more easily disgusted. They're more aroused psychologically, neurally, to threatening images. And these are not enormous differences. All of the differences we're talking about are fairly subtle. But if you test enough subjects, you see clear differences in sensitivity to threat. And a lot of people have argued that this connects to their political views. If you're very sensitive to threat, you might favor the status quo, favor leaving things where they are. If you're less sensitive to threat, you're more willing to be open to try new things. And as you mentioned before, these are both good traits to have. You don't want to sort of be totally locked into the status quo, nor do you want to give up everything you have, but they're in balance, and conservatives have a bit more threat sensitivity than liberals.
Apropos of what you just said, it will not come as a surprise to our viewers and listeners then that 9/11 was a significant event in terms of making people more conservative. That was obviously the biggest threat of our lifetime on the North American continent. And let me read something here that Yale University's John Barg wrote in the Washington Post. You know him?
My colleague and my friend.
Your colleague and your friend. Am I saying his last name right?
Barge.
Barge, thank you. Here's what he had to say. The boiling water of our social and political attitudes, it seems, can be turned up or down by changing how physically safe we feel. If the world feels more threatening or uncertain, do people become more conservative politically? What do you think?
I think they do. I think they do. And I also think this illustrates a point we should keep coming back to, which is that it's not like conservatives are always one way, liberals are the other way. There's some avenues for liberals where actually liberals are quite sensitive to threat. I'm not sure how much this extends to Canada, but the United States and the universities, there's a lot of talk about safe spaces, microaggressions, trigger warnings, where students are exquisitely concerned about threats to ethnic minorities and sexual minorities. And these are liberals.
Now, that is a feature of the Canadian post-secondary campus as well, of course.
And so anybody who says, well, only conservatives care about threat has to bear that in mind.
Becky, is it also true, the corollary, which is if we're in boom times and times are good, are more people likely to lean liberal?
So there is some evidence to that. I would also want to speak to the 9/11 issue. So I agree that the threat is nuanced in terms of that liberals and conservatives have different types of threats they might respond to. With 9/11 specifically, there's lots of evidence to suggest that after that event, people in particular that felt insecure or anxious about that event tended to kind of have this conservative shift. For instance, we saw a rise in people being more comfortable and supportive with restricting civil liberties. So that's one example of how people kind of move to the right, which you can understand why people would have that sort of psychological reaction when they feel threatened or insecure.
There's a scene in the film, Rod, when you go back to the school where Father Marshall taught you. What was it like to walk through that hallway again?
Well, it wasn't the hallway so much, but it was the staircases, because the staircases were exactly the same as when I was at school. I mean, the same tiles, the same windows, the same mezzanine type stairs, everything was exactly the same. So that brought me right back to being back at school, no question. And so what happens is that you go into that same mental state that you had when you were at school. And for me, it was always being in a position where I'm thinking, how can I get out of here? How can I flee? And so that's exactly how I felt when I was there.
And for Patrick, in the film, there's a scene of you standing in front of the church, and you're holding a sign.
Yes.
What's on the sign?
it was a quote from Pope Francis where he was recently speaking specifically about clerical sexual abuse, and then I had my own quote below it. So it was, I kind of tried to connect the two. So to encourage people who are seeing it to say, hey, this is what the Pope's directing us as good Catholics to embrace people who've suffered from this. And then I had my quote kind of inviting them to do so, and yet it didn't seem to have much impact on most people.
Well, even putting yourself out there in that visible spot, holding the sign, it was a very vulnerable position for you to be in. Why did you decide to do that? What was your hope in doing that?
I think one thing people don't realize when they see stories or read stories about victims of clerical sexual abuse is that it's not necessarily some stranger. It could be the person in line at the store next to you. It could be your own brother or sister. It could be your spouse, and you may not know. So what I wanted to do was put a face to the story for people and allow them that opportunity to interact. It's much more powerful to stand beside someone and say, tell me your story, than to just turn on the television or pick up a newspaper and read about some stranger's story.
Well, you've watched the documentary now a few times now at different festivals, and you've been able to see the reaction from the crowd. What was it like for you to be in those audiences and to see the reaction, Rod?
Well, you know, Rob was talking about cathartic effect, and that's where a lot of the cathartic effect for me has come. Because, as I say, I always believed that I was the only one. And every time we have one of these showings, after the showing, after the question period, people come up to me and share their story of sexual abuse. And so it's just so widespread in this society. It's just... It's unbelievable. And it's not unbelievable if you think of, well, when something like this happens, there's a tremendous amount of shame associated with the victim. And that's not where the shame should be. It should be with the predator. But in our society, that's how it settles. And so people are very, find it very difficult to come forward and to speak about it.
Why do you think it's so lopsided? Why do you think that it's the victims that feel the shame and then the others don't?
Well, it's because of the power imbalance. You know, the victims are children, so they don't have much power. And the perpetrators are always people who are in positions of authority. And so they are the ones who are able to command respect and are able to say, oh, that's nonsense and all the rest of it. And in my case, as with so many, when it's the Catholic Church that's involved, your whole family and social network have been indoctrinated with the idea that, you know, priests can do no wrong, that they are above the normal people, they're anointed and they're special. And, well, when all of that is added in, how can a child go against that?
You blame yourself.
Exactly.
That's just some of what we covered this week on the agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, that's at tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.